KPBS On Demand is supported by the San Diego County Toyota dealers, presenting the new 2025 Camry with refined design and performance. Visit your local Toyota dealer to learn more about all the features the new 2025 Camry offers. The San Diego County Toyota dealers. We make it easy.
Welcome back to another edition of the KPBS Cinema Junkie podcast. I'm Beth Accomando. On June 3rd, FilmOut, San Diego's LGBT film festival, kicks off its 18th year and will showcase some 40 films in 3 days. One film that stood out for me was Downriver. It reminded me of a film that screened at last year's FilmOut called Drown. Both films are from Australia, and both serve up dark tales intensified by an undercurrent of homophobia. Michael McQuiggan programmed both of these films.
Downriver it's a beautiful film. I don't know what's going on. Australia in the last few years has exploded in LGBT cinema. I mean, all of the films that we receive from Australia are outstanding. I mean, the performances in this film by Reef Ireland and Kerry Fox are outstanding. The cinematography is beautiful. And it's a mystery. I mean, you rarely see an LGBT film that has as much depth as Downriver, or say like we screened last year at Drown. Of all the films that are playing at the festival this year, I think a few of them that could cross over into the mainstream could be Downriver, and of course they could be Closet Monster, which is another film that kind of has a darker edge to it. That's from Canada. And so, and they both have young protagonists. So it can be related to a lot of the LGBT youth that don't think there are films out there for them that have characters that are them. I mean, they're relatable films.
You can check out my review of Drown from last year. Look for podcast number 18, and then check the film out. This year, I had the opportunity to interview the director of Downriver, Grant Scicluna. The film opens with James, played by Reef Ireland, being released from juvenile detention for his role in the murder of a young boy.
When I left, he was in the water.
Did you push him out?
No.
How deep was he? Over his head?
Not real deep.
We've had divers search right up and down there.
It's not far from the sea there.
But you didn't push him out.
I never lied.
So this doctor saying your epilepsy's made you forget things, it's not true, is it? Did you weigh him down? Or did you take him to the bushes?
It wasn't just me there.
But I don't have him, do I? So you wouldn't forget pushing him out? It's killing me. I can't keep looking. I'm the only one that still is.
The police should have found him.
They didn't need to. They had you.
I spoke with Grant by phone earlier this week. He was in Australia. His film screens Sunday, June 5th at the Observatory North Park, and then will hopefully find wider distribution theatrically or VOD. So here's my interview with Grant Scicluna. Grant, I wanted to find out, first of all, how did you decide on this particular story? Because this is your first feature film, correct?
Yes, it is. Yeah, look, the inspiration for it, as ideas often get generated for me out of conversations. And so I remember, a long time ago, because I started writing this almost 10 years ago, and I was talking with a friend, and there are numerous cases of children who have committed murders, sometimes other children, sometimes their parents, sometimes their friends. It's alarmingly a common scenario. And, we just started talking about this idea around nature versus nurture, and whether these children were inherently evil, or whether something in their background, or whether they were trapped and felt like that was the only possible way out in a child's mind. And so I just started writing the script from all of those questions, and that's where I like to write from, is just trying to discover how I feel about something, and then I guess use a screenplay or a film to make a point or prove a premise as to how I see a particular topic.
So you've been carrying this fairly dark story around with you for 10 years?
Yes. I'm not afraid of darkness. People sort of who know me in real life, they're like, why do you write such dark stuff? Because you're actually such a well-adjusted, happy person. I'm like, if you knew me on the inside. I feel like, with darkness is always the equal and the opposite, which is something about life. And so, for me, very much as I was working on this script, which is about death and grief, but at the same time, it's about the characters left behind who are trying to live and they're trying to make connections. And so I cannot just, wholeheartedly go into a dark story and just tell dark truths. At the same time, you have to look at what is also the opposite to that, which is, for me, in this story, about friendship and parenting and love in various forms and forgiveness and all of those things, which I guess you would say are much lighter or happier. And that, I think, kept me going as I was sort of confronting some of the tougher aspects of the story, that's for sure.
As somebody who watches a lot of films, I really appreciate people who can embrace the darkness a bit, because we get spoon-fed a lot of very kind of saccharine stories that seem to be afraid to go anyplace dark.
Yeah, I'm a bit averse to watching those films too.
So what in particular about these kind of characters that had initially intrigued you, this sense that there were young people involved in murders, what about that intrigued you enough to want to tell a story, and what were you hoping to kind of hit thematically by focusing on that aspect?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of elements to that question. And for me, I think what I was searching for in the beginning is I was quite prepared to tell, inverted commas, a dark hero story. And so, in a way, I didn't know what a challenge I was setting myself by telling a story from the point of view of this character, and a character who, when he was 10, committed murder. Usually protagonists in films are, sympathetic or have some kind of, redeeming qualities or things like that. And so I kind of wanted to break that rule. And so I wanted to find a story which was about sort of the worst possible place to begin a character. And the mission I set for myself is to try and understand that person and hopefully bring the audience along on walking the journey with that person, so that by the end of the film, my point, which I'm trying to make, is that you can't define a person by their actions when they're a child. I mean, if somebody said, oh, well, I understand the kind of person that you are because of what you did when you were 9 or 10, as extreme as it is, I just don't believe that you are who you are. And I also think that, as you go through life, you're constantly changing. And the person I am now in my 30s is completely different to the person in my 20s. And that's the point of life. That's the point of existence. And so I guess that possibility of really asking that question of, can you really condemn this character for what he did at the age of 10, especially when now he is trying so hard to atone for those confused few moments where he made the worst possible decision at the age of 10. And so it was just fascinating to me. It was a really fascinating territory and an interesting place to start a story, and a big challenge, as I said, because I was always aware of how the audience would feel, should feel, and my mission in kind of taking their hand and walking with them through the story.
You also choose a rather complex narrative structure in the sense that you do a lot of intercutting between action and kind of giving you two parallel storylines, or not complete storylines, but, two parallel things going on that you're cutting back and forth between. What made you want to structure it like that? Because I really enjoy that. I like being challenged as a viewer. Like I said, I don't like having stuff just spoon-fed to me, and it makes you pay attention and it engages you more, and I just really appreciated the way you structured it.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that, because we were sort of put ourselves out on a limb with that technique that you're talking about. it was not planned. The script wasn't scripted in that way. It was something which we discovered in the editing room. You know, it's very often that a scene will, you know, in coming to a close, you'll precede the cut into the next scene with some lines of dialogue from the incoming scene. And so that's just normal and accepted kind of film language. But we just started to push that further and further and further in the edit to this point where it was a kind of destabilizing effect. And I really, really liked what it did, because suddenly a scene would end visually, but we allowed dialogue from the previous scene to continue sailing into the next scene. And so what happens is that you have this kind of destabilizing moment where you're not sure whether what you've seen is past, present, you know, whether you're going back in time now. So there's a moment of kind of, as you say, where you have to sit up again and really start thinking about it and paying attention. And then I also loved the haunting effects that it had by having disembodied voices continuing over vision from other moments, just instantly creates a ghostly effect. And so all of that stuff just, for me, fed into aspects of tone, and then it builds and builds and as an effect until it reaches a real crescendo and a moment where, unless you're sitting up in your chair and really listening and watching, and your ear is doing one thing and your eye is doing another, you will miss it. You will miss what happens. And so I wanted to, kind of pay respect to the intelligence of the audience, that I knew that you could stick with it, and I knew that had you stuck with it, you would be feeling satisfied, because it's unconventional in that regard. I mean, I can't think of any other film. We were not necessarily inspired by any other film in that technique, but I mean, people are really responding to it and saying it's a really memorable aspect of the film.
Well, and I think that technique really plays into the mood that you're trying to create, because you mentioned that the word destabilizing, and I think you go into this kind of without any bearings, because you're not quite sure. You sense that there's something he's not quite telling you, or that he's not revealing fully. So you feel like you don't have all the details yet, and so you're kind of hanging on everybody's word, trying to figure out, like, okay, who's telling the truth, who's hiding something, where am I going to get like the rest of that information I need. And
so from the beginning, you know that you have to. This is a film that you have to pay attention to. It's not one of those films you mentioned before where you're going to be spoon-fed. And so, in accepting that challenge, then I guess the techniques of the film pay respect to that as well in the structure of the film as well as the content.
One thing that I think films underuse a lot is sound, but you use sound in a really effective way. There was especially one sequence where you hear this noise and you're not sure where it's coming from. You hear sound sometimes that doesn't seem specifically rooted in the scene you're watching, and you feel it has some memory quality to it. Can you talk a little bit about how you wanted to use sound and music to help create the mood?
Yeah, sound design is possibly one of my favorite aspects of filmmaking. It's really an underutilized and very creative part of filmmaking. And I think that the idea that we were just talking about then that we discovered in the edit really inspired our sound designer, so that she felt free to use that same idea of divorcing sounds from their visual and using it in an emotional way. And so just in that same way of leading into new scenes, she would bring sounds in from scenes that were coming up in 5 minutes' time. And you just feel these sounds, and I guess even you're not even aware that you've been feeling these sounds or hearing these sounds until suddenly you're led into this next scene. And so I just encouraged her to keep exploring that idea and always go from an emotional place and never try to be heavy-handed with it, so that it wasn't trying to be clever, but rather it was trying to evoke new emotion, or in sometimes deliver you like score, deliver you into a new tone or deliver you into a new place in the story, because the score in the film is very sparse, and there's only 3 moments of music, and they're used only in the final half. And so the other moments, which are kind of score-like, are all sound design, and they're taking sounds of cars going over bridges that she's manipulated into almost like a heartbeat, a rhythmic sort of heartbeat sound. But you don't recognize it as either. And so it's score-like rather than sound design. But I'm really proud of the sound. I'm really proud of the extremes that Emma pushed herself to. She's a very experienced sound designer, but she put herself out on a limb doing the sound design for our film, because there was no hiding behind score. And also, if you recall in the film, as well as the moments of real sort of prominent sound design, is also an extremely quiet film at times. And so there's some moments of real silence. And again, for a sound designer, that's really terrifying, because they can't hide behind anything, so that the deliberate choices of which sounds are in the scene are really calling attention to themselves. And so, yeah, I'm really happy. I'm really, really pleased that people are noticing the sound in retrospect. I think it's not done heavy-handed. It's just like, oh, wow, yeah, I do actually recall those moments because of how the sound made you feel.
It was very effective.
Cool.
The subject matter, there's a lot of really difficult material in this in terms of subject and emotions. How did you work with these young actors to get these performances out of them? Because they're all very good.
The young actors are all differing levels of experience as actors, and also differing walks of life. The thing that's common between them all is that they're all really emotionally mature young men. And so I set out from the beginning, even from the very first time I met them in the casting room, just to be completely honest about all aspects of the film and all aspects of their characters, and just trying to create an atmosphere where they could talk, ask questions, and I would answer all the questions honestly, whether it was about aspects of sexuality or identity or the violence in the film, or, anything that they were thinking about. And so they were very conversant, and also with each other, so supportive to each other through the making of the film. Even though, as the film goes on, friendships fall apart and, there's violence involved, but they were like the tightest knit little trio. And I think that's because they genuinely cared for each other through the making of the film. I think that the trick with actors of any age, and I think especially with younger actors, is you need to really identify what it is they need. And I think you can't play games with them. You just have to be really, really honest. And so one of them really wanted to talk a lot and had so many questions about his character and where he's coming from. And some of the others wanted to talk in rehearsal, but then when it got to the day and the shoot, then the conversation was over. Then it was more about just feeling the scene and less talking. But I think that my role as a director is to recognize which kind of actor they are, and there's a whole spectrum of performers, and just be that mirror person for them, and just to be able to give them everything they need in every moment of making the film. So yeah, it was tough at times. There's some really confronting scenes, but I think if you met those young guys, or if I see them on the street around Melbourne, they run across the street to find me and hug me, and we got through it, and we're kind of bonded, substitute family for each other.
And you had worked with Reef Ireland before, and you mentioned that you're starting this film at a difficult point in terms of the audience identifying with his character of James, but he has such a I don't know how to describe it, but it's such a like troubled and contemplative face that you feel a sympathy for him, even though what's going on in the scene is telling you that maybe you shouldn't. And so I'm just wondering what you saw in him in particular that made you want to cast him for this.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's that quality that you just put your finger on in Reef that is a really wonderful duality to him. His face itself, you know, even when he appears not to be doing anything, is telling a story, and he's a really kind person in life, and so I think that cannot help but seep out, especially if he allows himself, which he does. I try to encourage when I've worked with him on short films or on this, is to show that kindness and show that vulnerability. But at the same time, you know, he's a boy that's seen some tough stuff. He grew up in the western suburbs of Melbourne where it's tougher, and so he's got a wealth of experience to draw upon. And so when I was making the short film, the first short film I made was in The Wilding, I just saw this wonderful duality to him, which was kind of on one time kind of like a caged animal, you know, even brutal, and then, you know, flip the coin and he was the most gentle, loving human being. And so that just, for me, so suited this character. And I knew, I mean, when everybody else was worried about the sympathy aspect of telling the story from the point of view of the murderer, I knew that if you put Reef Island in that role and with that face, you know, the audience is going to be prepared to start walking with him. And that's not to say they will always want to walk with him, especially with the revelations that come, but just that first scene and allowing the audience to start a journey with him is so important. And I think it's all down to him and just who he is as a person, and he's prepared to not close that off to the camera.
What role did you want nature to play in the film? Because that adds another layer of, at times, tension to the story.
Yeah, well, I grew up in the Australian bush, and also I was a very imaginative child. I was always daydreaming, and so yeah, I mean the nature for me and the bush and the rural landscape is you know, easily sort of personified, and certainly adds a sense of tone, and also I grew up around rivers. And I grew up around rivers where bad things happened, and we were always told, you know, don't go swimming in the river, it was dangerous. And so instantly you start imbuing nature with these bad feelings. And so I think I've always carried that. And, you know, as Australians, we've got a real relationship with the bush. And so I had to be true to that as I was writing the film, but also shooting it. And so we shot a whole heap of material, which is, you know, of nature. And the shots themselves in isolation are kind of beautiful, but by nature of filmmaking, as soon as you place a shot alongside another scene or insert it in a particular point in the narrative, part of what you do as the audience is bring your own feeling onto that shot and then imbue the vision with your own feelings. And so, yeah, it's very important to me to ground a story in a world, and especially with the river. The shots of the river, you know, I think have a really haunting effect on people, because there's this sort of sense of the river always travelling. It's just always moving through, even when the characters themselves are stuck. And also this ghostly feeling that the child's body, which is still missing, is somehow in that water, is a kind of poisonous sensation of the life-giving aspect of water is suddenly poisoned by this event.
There was one scene in particular where there's a mother scolding her child, and the Carrie Fox character has sympathy for her where the character of her boyfriend doesn't. And it was a great scene because you It reminded you that there was this nature there that was dangerous, but then it gave you kind of this dual perspective on what we were witnessing from this one particular parent.
Don't go in there. I told you no. Listen to me. Get in the car.
That boy's gonna grow up terrified of it.
You have to walk in someone else's shoes for a bit. A boy drowned here. That's what that was about. That's why she hit him, because down there's where that boy went missing.
I didn't know that.
So she's scared, so that's on her mind.
You know, so much with Kerry Fox's character is tied up in her questioning her failure as a mother. And so when she witnesses that, and the other mother in question is telling her son, "Don't go down there," and Kerry's character Paige knows exactly what that is about, because down there is where the child went missing, and she reads that, and her boyfriend, who doesn't know the full extent of the situation, if much at all by that point, just reads it as a mother being uncaring and being too vicious to a child. And so there is that duality of seeing a situation from 2 points of view, and you start to really identify with Kerry Fox's character at that point, and the pain that she is carrying with her and has carried with her right through her mothering life, you know, two-thirds of her mothering life.
The boyfriend was an interesting character, too, because he has a surprising scene towards the end that I did not expect from him at all, when he kind of leaves and tells James a few things about having been to prison, about, you know, what happens to people who've been to prison.
I killed someone. She's just used to lying about it.
It's not your fault, mate. Sorry to leave you stranded.
I'm not stranded.
My brother went to prison, mate. I don't pretend to know what it's like, but he used to say people think you go in, you get punished, you come out. That's not the real punishment. It comes after. You have to convince yourself and everyone else that you're still worth something. Don't you let any bastard tell you that you don't deserve anything.
You know, I what I was trying to do in that scene is suggest the ongoing pain that Reef's character and the pain it can inflict upon his family, and that it will continue to inflict. And so you have this great guy who would ostensibly be a great new fatherly figure to James, and because of the circumstances, and mainly because of how James's mother is unable to reconcile, she's just so wounded, he has no option but to leave. And so the sadness to see him walk away, I think is really profound, because he proves, despite what you're expecting, which is as soon as he discovers that James is who he is, that he's going to have a negative reaction, he actually shows a vulnerable side to him, which is, I understand you because of my own family history. And so I guess he's embodying some of the themes of the film, which is about seeing past the action and trying to see to the person. And so that was a really important moment for everyone who was working on the film. And many people have really highlighted that moment as being, that's what the film is about. And I think to a degree it really is, because that's thematically what I'm trying to say with the film.
Well, and the compassion that he reveals is very different from what some of the other older male characters reveal from another family. FilmOut recently screened the film Drown, which was also Australian and also quite dark. And both your film and Drown reveal this kind of very ugly kind of homophobia that exists? Is that coincidental that both those films have dealt with that topic within like the past couple of years, or is that something reflective of, something going on in terms of what films are looking to right now in Australian culture?
Yeah, look, that's a really good question, and I do think about this in quite a bit, having seen a number of Australian films that are still on the topic of homophobia. It's a really interesting country because for a long time we've been seen as being very progressive. Our Mardi Gras Gay Pride March has been one of the most famous gay pride marches for 20 years. But at the same time, the debate about marriage equality is it feels like it should have come in and been more important in Australia years and years and years ago, and yet it's hardly on the political agenda, and it's very important to a lot of people, but it also seems to be a divisive issue, and so that speaks to an aspect of Australian culture that is still coming to terms with otherness, and I think that's a great aspect of our identity that we need to interrogate, and that's not just to do with gay people. It's about welcoming refugees. It's about multiculturalism. We because of our geography, I guess, don't rub up against people who are different to us enough, and so we still have in part of our culture a sense of fear of the other. And I think the films that you're talking about are still relevant in Australia because we still need to really do some work in that field.
And why do you feel it's important for your film to play at an LGBT festival? Is that an important thing for you?
It is. People say to me all the time, "Are you a gay filmmaker? Are you a filmmaker? How do you identify?" And I'm like, well, I am a filmmaker. I'm also gay. I love to see all kinds of cinema, but I especially love to go to queer film festivals. It's my favourite film festival here in Melbourne is our GLBT festival. And so for me to have Downriver embraced and play to queer audiences feels to me like reaching out, a sense of community that I've always had with GLBT people around the world by extension of seeing each other's films and sometimes travelling to the festivals and meeting audiences. And so it's very important to me to have our film embraced in that way. At the same time, I think, when even looking at the conversation that you and I have been having now, we, until that last question, have not really talked about sexuality or sexual identity or anything like that, because I don't think that my film necessarily has that as its primary concern. And so at the same time, if you actually start to break down the sexualities of the characters, there's a lot of queerness, in inverted commas, going on there, whether it's kind of bisexuality, homosexuality, other kind of forms of sexuality. It's all there. But the primary concern is more about redemption and forgiveness and family and things like that. It just so happens that the characters are gay. Some of the good characters are gay, some of the bad characters are gay. And so that was very important to me, and I had to really cling on to that because a lot of people said, well, why do the characters have to be gay in your story? As if to say that the audience would be bigger or the story would be more palatable if, some of the young men were actually young straight women. And so I had these conversations in development, but for me, I was like, no, this is the world that I see as a gay person. I see gay people all around me. There's real visibility of gay people, and some of them are good and some of them are not. But it was very important to me to have my film populated by a number of sexualities. And so it's great then that the film, despite it not being, an obvious kind of queer film or GLBT film, that the GLBT festivals are embracing it and playing it just feels like a natural fit.
Well, yeah, I mean, your film really is first and foremost about things like guilt and loss and redemption. I mean, that's primarily, kind of the themes that you're tackling.
Yeah, that's right. And which is not to say that, I'm not interested in films which are about gay identity or struggling with sexuality or homophobia or anything like that. I think those films and those issues are still absolutely relevant to a lot of people all around the world. But at the same time, I think it's really exciting to make films which are about other things, but to populate them with queer characters. I think that's really an exciting place to be as a filmmaker and for the audience.
I think it makes it a more interesting film if you put those issues of things like guilt and loss and redemption in the forefront, and then the other issues all come up because of looking at those things.
Yeah, that's right. Just sort of bleeding through the narrative. Yeah, I think that's important.
And do you feel that having your film play at a LGBT festival, does that eventually help your film get to a wider audience or to wider distribution?
Well, yeah. I mean, we do have distribution in the US, and it's very important to that distribution company to have the film play at film festivals and have a run at film festivals so that it can find an initial audience and build that word of mouth, but also have a kind of critical response, grow a sense of awareness around the film so that it doesn't just drop out of nowhere and therefore not get seen. So, the film festivals that we've played in, it's just beginning in the US, but already, it's been incredibly helpful for our distributor in planning the release of the film, which is for the second half of this year. So, yeah, and for me, having audiences all around the world discover the film, and I love reading when people write about the film on blogs or people tweet about it or tweet me or try and tweet the cast. I love that sense of the film finding its audience and hopefully moving its audience.
You made a lot of short films before Downriver. Did you feel that the process of making those short films prepared you for making this feature?
Yeah, absolutely, because as I sort of hinted at in the start of this conversation, I trained as a writer, and so I was working on the feature script throughout that process of trying to learn how you write a script. But I didn't train as a director, and so all the training I got was on set through short films, all the mistakes, and I made a lot of them. But also just really trying to get a handle on what it is a director does, how a director should behave, how a director should communicate with crew, with actors. All of that is incredibly complicated, especially for someone like me who's quite introverted and very, very shy, and so I don't naturally sort of suit the gregarious image of what a director does or how they behave. And so working on shorts really built up that confidence for me and enabled me to really break down the job into its parts and find what I was good at and what I was strong at. And I think that's working with actors, and I think that to a lesser degree, I'm not as strong as a visual storyteller as I am in being able to communicate with actors. And so what that meant for me was I put next to me a very, very experienced director of photography or camera person, and so that they build me up in that sense, and they take that responsibility, and I can lean on them in that sense to pick up that weaker aspect of what I'm still discovering and still learning. And I think shorts, if you're properly using the short form as a development tool, it's an invaluable way of really trying to work out what it is you're good at, what it is you can be better at, make the mistakes, and learn the lessons.
Now that the film is done and has been screening at festivals and elsewhere, what do you feel most proud of about it?
Yeah, it's I'm really proud that it is the film that we set out to make, because, oftentimes if directors are really honest with you, they'll say, there, especially in a low-budget realm, which we are in, there's so many compromises along the way. And we stuck to our guns, and I've got this sort of fatalistic attitude towards filmmaking, which is, you have to make the film exactly as it should be, or else you'll regret it. And at some point, the film that you are about to make will be the final film that you get to make, and so you have to really honour that. And so I often said to my producer, this may be our one and only shot at making a feature film. And she agreed completely. And so she and I were just like, it has to be as we want it. Otherwise we will regret it and not feel proud of it. And so when I look at it, I see, despite all the challenges and the lack of resources and the time constraints and all those sort of things that are inherent to low-budget filmmaking, I'm like, it is the film that I foresaw. So I'm really pleased about that, and I think that that's a credit to all the crew and the actors that they saw the same film in the script, and so were able to help me get to that end result.
All right. Well, thank you very much for taking some time to speak with me today.
I really appreciate it. Thanks for a very insightful question.
That was director Grant Scicluna, whose film Downriver will play at FilmOut in San Diego on June 5th. But get there early, because there will be street closures for the Rock and Roll Marathon. Thanks for listening to another edition of the KPBS Cinema Junkie podcast. Subscribe to the podcast on iTunes and check out the online archives at kpbs.org/junkiepodcast. Next week, I'll speak with first-time filmmaker Bettina Nueno about her look at Kenya's music, politics, and railways. So till our next Film Fix, I'm Beth Accomando, your resident cinema junkie.
KPBS On Demand is supported by the San Diego County Toyota dealers, presenting a new 2025 Tundra designed to combine performance and comfort with up to 437 horsepower and 10-speed automatic transmission. See your Toyota dealer, the San Diego County Toyota dealers. We make it easy.